Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
My parents forced me to work at the family farm, refused to pay for college, and disowned me. My uncle took me in and left me, his entire estate. At his funeral, they demanded money. Then my little sister showed up bruised and sobbing at my door. Hey, Reddit! I grew up as free labor on my family's sacred farm, while my brother got the golden child treatment. I finally said screw it and left, but my parents weren't done causing damage. Here's where it all started. My name's Seth Gordon, I'm 18, and until recently my full-time job was being free labor on my family's 200-acre farm. Not that anyone ever called it a job. According to my parents, it was the Gordon duty, which is basically a fancy way of saying I didn't get a choice. Some kids grow up with hobbies or friends. I grew up with chores that multiplied whenever I blinked. People romanticize farm life like it's peaceful, but that only works if you're visiting for 2 days, and someone else is the one waking up before sunrise. For me, it was an unpaid subscription I never signed up for. Every morning started the same. My dad, Jeffrey, barking orders, my mom, Beatrice, calling it character building, and me wondering why child labor laws seem to skip our property entirely. My great-grandfather built the farm, my grandparents expanded it, and my parents love to brag about protecting the legacy. Funny how legacy always translates to more work for the youngest kid. The older generation gets credit, the middle gets authority, and people like me get to shovel manure and pretend it's meaningful? Then there's Dominic, older brother, golden child, heir to the throne. He could screw up anything and still get praised for trying. He once left the gate unlatched and sent half our livestock onto the road. Jeffrey called it a learning experience. I forgot to coil a hose once and apparently committed treason. Dominic got the interesting work. I got whatever was repetitive, miserable, or both. I knew I didn't want to end up buried in the same fields my great-grandfather died in, so I secretly saved money working for our neighbor. My escape fund, my retirement plan at 17. But in my family, anything you earn becomes community property, if the community decides they want it. And they definitely decided. My sister Mavis is younger, 14, and she learned early that staying quiet was the safest strategy. She wasn't loud, she wasn't defiant, she wasn't anything that drew attention. She'd watch everything, take mental notes, and keep her head down. Honestly, I think she understood the family dynamic better than the rest of us. Kids notice patterns whether adults admit it or not. Most days on the farm felt the same. Wake up in the dark, do chores, go to school already exhausted, come home to more chores, eat, sleep, repeat. If you broke the cycle by, say, having your own opinion, the house reacted like you'd unplugged life support. The farm came first. Feelings came last. Usually not at all. And the thing is, you can live like that for years before realizing how weird it actually is. When you're raised in a system, you think the system is normal. You don't question why adults talk about a field like it's sacred but ignore their kids burning out. You don't question why fairness seems to skip certain siblings. You just keep your head down until eventually something snaps. Looking back, the unofficial rule of the house was pretty simple. If something breaks, it's the kid's fault. If the kid breaks, well, try working harder. That's the environment I grew up in, and I didn't know it yet, but everything was already shifting under the surface. The more I wanted out, the tighter the farm tried to pull me back in. I figured out pretty early that I liked computers more than cows, which in my house basically qualified as treason. The whole thing started when our school replaced the ancient computers that sounded like dying engines with actual working ones. Most kids use them to play games. I clicked on anything that looked like a setting I wasn't supposed to touch. One afternoon, my computer teacher leaned over my shoulder and asked, "How'd you figure that out already?" I shrugged. "Click the only button that didn't look friendly." She laughed and said, "You should think about the advanced computer and math track next year. You'd do great in it." It was the first time an adult looked at something I did and saw potential instead of manpower. I brought the news home like it was something worth celebrating. Jeffrey didn't even look up from sorting bills. They had been piling up for years. I had lost count of how many times I overheard him arguing with the bank about late payments. "When does it meet?" he asked. "In the fall," I said. He dropped the envelope in his hand and finally made eye contact. "That's harvest season," Beatrice added. "We'll need you here, honey. Maybe another year." So that was that. Achievement unlocked, achievement deleted. Apparently crops die instantly if I'm not personally standing next to them. The school counselor called them in a week later. I wasn't allowed inside the meeting, but afterwards she walked me to the hall and said, "Seth, this track could help you with college admissions. Pulling you out isn't in your best interest. Jeffrey brushed past her, tossing out, "College isn't the plan anyway," like he was announcing the weather. The counselor blinked. "Sir, with respect, no need for a lecture," he said. "We know what we're doing." I didn't argue. I knew better. Logic didn't live in our house. The farm did. Anything else was considered distraction, weakness, or both. After that, I started keeping my interest to myself. Honesty wasn't exactly a valued crop on our property. If you liked something, it became a liability. If you wanted something, it became selfish. If you were good at something that wasn't farm-related, it became irrelevant. So I worked on computers in secret. I stayed after school under the excuse of needing help with math, which was technically true if you count learning new coding concepts as math. The computer lab became the only place where no one expected me to lift anything heavier than a keyboard. Around this time, Noel started showing up more in family conversations. Not physically, just as a topic. He was Jeffrey's younger brother, the one who betrayed the family, which in our family meant got a life. To hear Jeffrey tell it, Noel had committed some unforgivable betrayal. Abandonment, disrespect, selfishness, whatever label wasn't being used on me that day. Beatrice would shake her head and say, "He thinks he's better than us." Jeffrey added, "City life messes with people's heads." I didn't say out loud that Noel's head seemed perfectly fine considering he had an actual salary, working heat, and a spine. The more I learned about computers, the more farming felt like a trapdoor someone closed before I knew what was happening. I wasn't planning an escape yet. I was just realizing I needed one eventually. One evening, when Jeffrey told me to stay home from a school event because the barn roof needs patching, I made the mistake of saying, "Couldn't Dominic do it?" Jeffrey stared at me. "Dominic has work early. Don't start." Translation: Dominic's time is valuable. Mine is refillable. I patched the roof while Dominic sat inside polishing the new truck Jeffrey bought him for farm work, which mostly meant joyriding. I remember scraping old shingles off and thinking how ridiculous it was that every time I got a chance to do something meaningful, computer class, school events, anything, Jeffrey shut it down, like it was a threat. By 16, I understood the family rulebook pretty well. Speak less, work more, want nothing, lose nothing, ask for nothing, disappoint no one. People say parents want the best for their kids. In my house, they wanted the same for their kids. Same life, same path, same future. Preferably one that didn't involve thinking too far ahead. Consistency was the real family value. Everything else was treated like rebellion. Noel was the first adult who ever talked to me like my future existed. He'd call every couple of weeks, usually after work, and ask what I was learning in the computer lab. Nothing dramatic, just simple stuff like, "You still messing with Python?" Or, "You figure out that sorting thing yet?" But compared to the usual questions I got at home, "Did you feed the calves? Why's the south fence leaning? Did you wash the truck?" It felt like a different language. I'd joke, "You know, Noel, being treated like a human is weird. Not sure I'm used to it." He'd laugh and say, "That's the bare minimum, kid." Funny how bare minimum can feel like generosity when you grow up without it. One weekend, he showed up unannounced. Jeffrey wasn't thrilled, but he didn't forbid it since Noel was technically still family. Noel pulled me aside and handed me a laptop case. Nothing fancy, just a used machine he refurbished himself. "Thought you could use your own," he said. "Might make learning easier." I whispered, "This feels like you're smuggling contraband." "Yeah," he said. "Don't tell your dad it has a keyboard." I wasn't even halfway through turning it on when Jeffrey walked in. His eyes locked onto the laptop like it was a wild animal loose in the kitchen. "What's that?" he asked. "It's a laptop," Noel said. "For Seth." Jeffrey's jaw clenched. "He doesn't need that." Noel kept his tone even. "It's for school." Jeffrey snapped back. "School doesn't require whatever that is." Beatrice hovered behind him, arms crossed, watching like she wasn't sure whether to scold or pray. Noel handed me the charger anyway. "Use it for your classes, okay?" Jeffrey didn't yell, but his voice went flat, the dangerous kind of quiet. "We'll discuss how and when you use it." And that was that. Laptop smuggled in, then immediately thrown into lockdown. I was allowed to use it for approved school tasks, which apparently meant whenever no one important needs you for something else. It still felt like freedom even with supervision. You take what you can get in a house like ours. A few months later came the infamous truck incident, which basically confirmed everything I already knew about fairness in the family. Jeffrey bought Dominic a brand new truck for farm work, even though Dominic's contribution to the farm was mostly standing near machinery while I actually ran it. I remember watching Jeffrey hand over the keys like it was some passing of the torch moment. Dominic grinned like he'd earned it through grit and hard work. not through being the oldest son with the right personality. Dominic totaled the truck 2 weekends later. Word spread fast because around here everyone has binoculars, but no boundaries. Dominic had driven it into a ditch after drinking at a friend's place. The truck was wrecked, the fence was ruined, and the neighbor whose property he tore through was angry enough to consider pressing charges. I expected chaos, yelling, accountability, something. Instead, the town treated it like a tragic accident that had befallen poor Dominic, the hard-working farm boy who must have been exhausted. People gave him sad smiles and told Jeffrey, "Kids make mistakes." Nobody used the word reckless or drunk. That kind of honesty is apparently reserved for younger sons who don't want to farm. The only real consequence was financial. Repairs, fees, and fence damages weren't cheap. One morning, Beatrice knocked on my door holding the small metal lockbox where I kept the money I earned working for our neighbor. She said, "We need this for the truck situation." I stared at it. "That's my school money." "It's for the family," she said. "Don't be a brat." Apparently my money volunteered. Good to know savings have free will. I didn't fight them. Fighting never changed anything. It just added more chores. They emptied the box and walked out like they hadn't just stolen from their own kid. The farm needed saving, and apparently I was the only one available to sacrifice anything. Dominic kept both his freedom and the sympathy tour. Noel found out later when he noticed I wasn't buying any of the study materials he recommended. He didn't say anything at first, probably waiting to confirm whether I'd tell him. When I finally admitted what happened, he sighed. "You know that wasn't right," he said. "Fairness wasn't a policy. Hell, it wasn't even a suggestion. At best, it was a rumor that never made its way to our side of the county." The day the acceptance letter came, I opened it in the barn because it was the only place where nobody hovered. I read the first line, "We are pleased to inform you." And for a second, I actually felt something close to pride. The real kind. The kind I'd only ever seen other kids get. Then I remembered excitement doesn't survive long in certain rooms. I walked into the kitchen, holding the letter like it might burn through my hand if I hesitated. Jeffrey was at the table sharpening a pocket knife, for no reason other than dramatic effect. Beatrice was rinsing vegetables, like she expected applause for it. "I got into the computer science program," I said. Silence. "The kind that doesn't mean shock. It means calculation." Jeffrey finally spoke. "And what am I supposed to do with that information?" I blinked. "I thought you'd want to know. It's a good school." Beatrice set a bowl down. "Seth, you don't even like being away from home that long? Interesting news to me?" Jeffrey leaned back. "We raised you better than to run off chasing nonsense." There it was, my future, magically transformed into their embarrassment. Accepting the letter apparently meant abandoning the farm, the family, the ancestors, the crops, the fence posts, basically every non-human entity my parents prioritized. I tried to be rational. I can learn things that help the farm. There's tech that makes... Jeffrey cut me off. Real farmers use their hands, not whatever screens you're obsessed with. Right. Because touching dirt automatically makes you wise. The argument escalated fast. Eventually, Jeffrey stood up, pointed at the door and said, "If you leave for that school, don't come back." Beatrice added, "Think very carefully. This family depends on you." It was presented like a choice, but it felt more like a test with one answer they had already circled in red pen. I remember thinking, interesting technique. Shame I'm not enrolled in obedience school instead of college. I left 2 days later. Noel pulled into the driveway around mid-morning. I carried out my duffel bag, and Jeffrey stepped onto the porch like he'd been waiting to intercept me. "You walk off this property now," he said. "You're choosing strangers over blood." "I'm choosing a future you don't want me to have," I answered. "That future is pointless," he snapped. "You're meant to work this land." Beatrice appeared behind him. "We just want what's best for you." I let out a short laugh. "No, you want what's best for the farm." Jeffrey's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone." "I've been watching it my whole life," I said. Didn't make a difference. Dominic came out onto the porch, arms crossed like he was supervising. "You're really leaving?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "College tends to work better when you're near it." Jeffrey jabbed a finger toward Noel. "He put this in your head. Manipulated you." Noel stayed calm. "He's 18. He made the decision." "Stay out of it," Jeffrey snapped. "You shoved me out years ago," Noel said. "Might as well stay consistent." Jeffrey turned back to me. "Once you get in that car, you're not my son." "You made that call before I did," I said. I picked up my bag and started walking toward Noel's car. And that's when the screen door slammed open behind us. "Mavis, no!" Beatrice shouted, too late. Mavis sprinted across the porch barefoot, almost slipping on the last step. She ran straight into me and grabbed me around the middle with both arms like she was holding a lifeline. "Seth, don't go," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please." I closed my eyes for a second. This was the part I wasn't ready for. "I have to," I said softly. "You know I do." She shook her head against my shirt. "It won't be the same." "I know," I said. "But I'm not disappearing. I'll find a way to talk to you." Jeffrey barked, "Mavis, get back here now." She didn't move. I tightened my arms around her for a few seconds, then gently pulled back. "Go inside before he loses it," I said. "I'll see you again, I promise." Her eyes were red, but she nodded and stepped back. Beatrice grabbed her by the shoulders and steered her toward the door like she was herding livestock. Mavis looked over her shoulder once, and then she was gone inside the house. I got in Noel's car before I changed my mind. I thought moving out meant the drama would calm down. It didn't. Within a week, I started getting texts from cousins, aunts, a couple uncles I barely knew, all variations of the same message. "How could you do this to your parents? They're heartbroken. You should come home and apologize." One cousin added, "Your dad said you ran away." Ran away? I left with a suitcase, a plan, and a ride. Not exactly the plot of a missing person report. It didn't take long to realize Jeffrey had rewritten the story. In his version, I wasn't accepted into college and choosing my future. I was manipulated by Noel, confused, ungrateful, brainwashed by city ideas, and apparently too emotional to think for myself. I didn't know whether to laugh or send out a correction email. The narrative was impressive in a deranged kind of way. Jeffrey had crafted a whole alternate reality where he was the victim and I was the runaway delinquent. It explained why relatives who never visited suddenly cared deeply about family unity. One aunt wrote, "Your father is devastated. He said you stormed off." Stormed off? I packed quietly while Beatrice hovered behind me, whispering prayers like I was terminal. If I stormed, I must have done it silently and with efficient folding. Meanwhile, Mavis went radio silent. She wasn't allowed a phone until a certain age, so most of our communication was through short emails or messages sent from school computers. Except now, nothing came through. Every message I sent sat unopened. Every question went unanswered. I asked Noel, "You think she's okay?" "She's probably not allowed to talk to you," he said. "Your dad sees control as strategy." The weirdest part was how family members reacted like I'd committed a crime. Leaving home at 18 for college is normal everywhere else. But in my family, leaving the farm is treated like desertion. Once Jeffrey told everyone I'd been led astray, the hostility made more sense. Nothing spreads faster in rural communities than a false narrative with emotional seasoning. Noel tried to help. He repeated the same line whenever I looked worn down. "Let them talk. You're not responsible for their story." Easier said than done, but he wasn't wrong. After a few weeks, I stopped explaining myself. If people wanted the story Jeffrey wrote, they could keep it. I didn't owe anyone a rebuttal. For a while, life with Noel felt almost steady. Not perfect, not simple, just steady. Then he started having stomach pain that wouldn't go away. At first, he brushed it off, saying it was bad takeout or stress. But stress doesn't make someone lose weight that fast, or make them wince when they think you're not looking. When the doctor said stage 4 pancreatic cancer, everything in the room seemed to shrink. It was the kind of news that doesn't need embellishment. You hear it once, and it hangs between you like a heavy curtain. Noel nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting something bad, but hoping for something slightly less catastrophic. I just stared at the floor, trying to keep my brain from overheating. I wasn't sad yet. It was too fast for sadness. More like shock trying on different outfits. That night at the apartment, Noel said, "You might want to delay starting your first semester." "I'm not leaving you alone," I said. He didn't argue, which scared me more than anything. Caregiving started gradually, then all at once. I went from college prep to tracking medication schedules, timing meals, and figuring out which foods wouldn't upset his stomach. "Congratulations," I told him one morning while sorting pill bottles. "You've promoted me to part-time nurse." "Zero experience, but I promise enthusiasm." He smirked. "As long as you don't accidentally poison me?" "No promises," I said. "Your labels are tiny." We both pretended that joking made cancer less loud. Hospice nurses came by to teach me the basics: what signs to watch for, when to call, how to help him move without hurting him. I took notes like a student in a class I never signed up for. It was necessary. As his energy declined, he spent more time talking about things he needed to prepare. Not emotional goodbyes, legal ones. "We need to get my will updated," he said one afternoon while sorting through old paperwork. "You don't have to rush that." He looked at me like I'd missed something obvious. "Seth, you know who your parents are." Fair point. He met with his lawyer twice. I sat in the living room while they talked behind closed doors. When he came out, he looked tired, but relieved. I'm making arrangements, he said. The apartment, savings, investments, all going to you. I shook my head. Noel, that's too much. No, he said firmly. It's barely enough. You're starting your life. And I know exactly what would happen if your father thought even $5 were up for grabs. He said it calmly, but the implication was sharp. He wasn't being dramatic. He was being accurate. A few days later, I got a message from Dominic. That alone was suspicious. He hadn't messaged me since I left. Hey, how's Uncle Noel doing? The question was fine, but I could already feel a calculator behind it. He's sick, I replied. It's serious. Dominic responded fast. Serious like long-term? Or serious like expensive? There it was. Not even subtle. He has cancer, I wrote. He's dying. A 5-minute pause. Then, damn, you doing okay? Is he leaving anything for you? I mean, it'd make sense since you're taking care of him. Concern with a price tag. Classic Dominic. I stared at the screen for a moment before replying, We're not talking about money right now. But he kept going. Just asking. Dad said Noel's got a good amount saved. I put my phone face down and left it there. Every time I thought maybe Dominic was just oblivious, he'd remind me that everything in his world was measured by dollar signs and convenience. His version of sympathy always came with a ledger. A week later, Jeffrey and Beatrice finally decided to visit. They hadn't called. They hadn't sent a message. They just showed up, knocking like they were doing a wellness check. When I opened the door, Jeffrey looked past me like I was a misplaced suitcase. We're here to see Noel, he said. Beatrice added, We thought it was time. Time for what? Time to pretend they cared? Time to look for financial crumbs? I let them in because Noel wouldn't want scenes. They walked into the living room where he was resting on the couch. Jeffrey's first question wasn't, How are you holding up? Or, Do you need anything? It was, Do you have all your paperwork in order? Beatrice followed with, We just want to make sure everything's handled responsibly. Noel gave me a look that said, I told you so. I sat on the arm of the chair, watching them circle him like clipboard inspectors. They asked more questions about documents than about his pain levels. They wanted to know about the apartment lease, the medical bills, the bank accounts. At one point, Beatrice said, We can help manage things if needed. Noel's voice was quiet but steady. I've already arranged everything. Jeffrey frowned like he'd smelled something sour. Arranged how? That's not your concern, Noel said, not looking up. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. It was the closest thing to revenge Noel would ever bother with. They stayed less than 20 minutes. When they left, Jeffrey said, Let us know if there are any changes. Changes meaning opportunities. Subtle as ever. The second the door shut, Noel exhaled. They didn't ask how I'm feeling. No, I said. But they did ask about everything else. He closed his eyes. I'm sorry you have to deal with that. It's fine, I said. Sarcasm is cheaper than therapy. He laughed weakly. Keep doing whatever keeps you sane. I nodded. Plan on it. Caring for Noel didn't make me angry. Jeffrey and Beatrice did. Dominic did. Every time they spoke, every question they asked, every message they sent, it all came with strings attached. They were worried his money wouldn't die with him. Noel passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning. No dramatic last words, no movie moment. Just a slow exhale and stillness. I held his hand because it felt wrong not to. After everything he did for me, sitting beside him at the end was the least I could give back. The funeral was scheduled 3 days later. I arrived early, mostly to avoid the flood of relatives with opinions I didn't ask for. The funeral home was small, worn around the edges, and smelled faintly like old books. It suited Noel better than anything polished ever would have. People trickled in slowly, his coworkers first, then a few neighbors. The ones who actually mattered came early to mourn. The ones who didn't came early to manage assets. I spotted my parents' car long before they stepped out. Jeffrey parked like the space owed him respect. Beatrice followed behind him with her chin lifted, as if grief had a dress code and she was the only one who got the memo. Before I could brace myself, something small and fast collided with me. Seth! It was Mavis, hair messy, tears already running down her cheeks. She wrapped her arms around me with a force that nearly winded me. They could not skip the funeral without looking heartless, so they brought Mavis along and hovered like security. I missed you, she whispered. I held her tight. Missed you too. It was the first time I'd seen her, heard her voice, or touched her since the day I left. She didn't care who was watching. She didn't care that Jeffrey was glaring from 10 feet away like affection was contraband. She just kept hugging me like the world might crack if she let go. Beatrice finally called out, Mavis, give him some space. Mavis didn't move until I gently loosened my grip. I'm not disappearing, I said quietly. I told you I'd see you again. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Jeffrey snapped his fingers. Literally snapped. And she walked back toward them like someone returning to a cage they'd learned not to rattle. Fun start to the day. Inside the viewing room, the tension wasn't subtle. You could have cut the air with the programs they handed out at the door. Noel's picture sat framed on a table, him smiling awkwardly, clearly forced into taking the photo. He would have hated all the fuss. Relatives I barely recognized came up with sympathetic lines that sounded practiced. So, sorry for your loss, Seth. He was such a good man. You were good to him. Then Jeffrey approached, and the sympathy evaporated. We need to discuss arrangements, he said by way of greeting. Arrangements for what? I asked. The estate, he replied. I glanced at the casket. He's not even buried yet. Jeffrey lowered his voice. These things matter. We can't wait around. Beatrice added, We're only trying to help make sure things are handled properly. Translation. We want to see what we can grab before it's locked down. I didn't argue. There was no point. Letting them talk was easier than acting like they cared. During the service, they whispered constantly, to each other, to their lawyer, to relatives. While a co-worker of Noel's shared a story about how Noel mentored new hires, Jeffrey was flipping through documents like he was reviewing blueprints. At one point, I heard him mutter, This can't be right. Beatrice whispered back, He wasn't thinking clearly at the end. I didn't turn around. I didn't correct her. I let the implication hang like a foul smell. Nothing I said would matter to people who thought grief was a financial inconvenience. When the service ended, everyone moved to the reception area. People gathered around the food table, sharing stories about Noel. Meanwhile, Jeffrey cornered me near the coffee urn. The apartment goes back to the family, he said. It's what Noel would have wanted. No, I said calmly. It's what you want. He ignored that entirely. And the savings. Those should be split. Fair is fair. When have you ever cared about fair? Before he could answer, Noel's lawyer approached with his briefcase. Everyone involved in the will should come inside, he said. Jeffrey smirked. Good. Let's get this sorted. Sorted. Sure. We all went into a small conference room. The lawyer opened his folder and pulled out a flash drive. Noel left a recorded statement to accompany the written will. Jeffrey shifted. That won't hold if he wasn't competent. The lawyer pressed play. Noel's voice filled the room. Clear, steady, unmistakably competent. This is my decision. I am of sound mind. I'm leaving everything to Seth because he's the only one who stood by me. I don't trust anyone else in the family to handle my estate responsibly. He even listed reasons, specific examples, things he'd never say out loud to them, but made sure to memorialize permanently. When the recording ended, the lawyer looked up. Any questions? Jeffrey's mouth opened, then closed. Beatrice's face twitched like she'd tasted something bitter. Seth, 1. Them, 0. Noel had planned better in dying than they ever did in living. Back at the apartment afterward, people flowed in and out offering condolences. I went to check on the guest room, mostly to breathe for a second. When I walked into Noel's office, I stopped cold. Beatrice was inside, on her knees, rifling through drawers. What are you doing? I asked. She snapped upright, clutching papers. I'm looking for family photos. In the tax drawer? She straightened her cardigan. I have a right to know what's being hidden. I pointed at the door. Get out. She hesitated, then brushed past me with a muttered, ungrateful. Grief apparently involves filing cabinets. Who knew? After they finally left the apartment, the place felt noticeably quieter, like someone shut off a machine that had been rattling for hours. Peace arrived faster than they reached their car in the parking lot. That was the moment I decided something permanently. I was done. I cut contact that night, and in the sudden quiet, I realized the truth. Losing people who never acted like family doesn't feel like loss. It feels like breathing. Starting college didn't come with cinematic music or a life-changing sunrise. I went to classes, turned in assignments, kept my head down, and tried to rebuild something resembling stability. Between coursework and handling the last pieces of Noel's estate, my days felt full but manageable. Grief didn't hit in waves. It just sat quietly in the background like a roommate who didn't pay rent. My parents didn't contact me. Dominic didn't either. Silence wasn't surprising. It was probably the first productive thing they'd ever done. Then, one night close to midnight, someone banged on my apartment door hard enough to make the frame shake. Seth, please, open! Mavis. I yanked the door open and she practically fell into me. She was crying, trembling, holding a backpack like it was her only possession. Her sleeves shifted, revealing bruises. Fresh ones, fading ones, fingerprints. What happened? I asked. She couldn't speak. She lifted the backpack, unzipped it, and shoved papers into my hands. Inside were printed emails, handwritten notes, and a drafted marriage agreement. Their signatures. The neighbor's signature. The same guy whose fence Dominic tore through when he totaled the truck. Dates, financial arrangements, everything. They're marrying me off, she choked. Dad said it fixes everything. I held the contract, stunned. He signed this? She nodded. Dominic knew. He drove me there last week. He said I should just do what Dad says. Dominic. The silent golden child turned accomplice. My jaw clenched. Did Dad do this? I asked, motioning to the bruises. He grabbed me. I tried to run. Mom said I was embarrassing them. I didn't tell her it was worse than embarrassing. It was illegal. She didn't need legal definitions. She just needed safety. You're staying here, I said. Right now. I called CPS first, then Noel's lawyer. When the CPS investigator arrived, Mavis sat wrapped in a blanket, answering questions in a small, careful voice. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't exaggerating. She just told the truth, which was more than enough. The investigator photographed her bruises, collected the documents, and asked, Has this happened before? Mavis hesitated. Dad gets angry a lot. He grabs hard. Mom says it's discipline. The investigator's jaw tightened. You will not be going back there. Within a couple of days, Mavis was officially removed from my parents' custody under emergency protective action. CPS asked if I'd take temporary placement. Yes, I said immediately. The investigator nodded. We'll schedule a court hearing this week. Over the next couple of weeks, everything exploded. The emails, the contract, the bruises, the financial records, it all went straight to the district attorney. Noel's lawyer forwarded additional evidence about my parents' attempt to interfere with Noel's estate and the financial abuse of both their children. The DA's office moved fast. Criminal charges were filed against Jeffrey and Beatrice. Child endangerment, physical abuse, attempted forced marriage, coercive control, financial exploitation of a minor Dominic wasn't spared. His involvement in driving Mavis to meetings and pressuring her to go along with it got him included on the misconduct report. He wasn't charged at the same level as the parents, but he became legally restricted from contacting her. By the end of the week after the charges were filed, CPS secured temporary protective orders for both me and Mavis. Jeffrey, Beatrice, and Dominic were barred from contacting us or coming anywhere near where we lived. Violating those orders meant immediate arrest. It was the first time the law felt like something standing with us instead of against us. Jeffrey didn't take the news well. He left a voicemail for me, starting with yelling, ending with martyrdom. You had no right to interfere. You're tearing this family apart. You think you can steal my daughter? You'll regret this. We're taking you to court. Beatrice left her own message, voice shaky. We didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. Your father is stressed. Please, just bring her home. We can talk. Talk. Right. Forced marriage definitely sounds like an issue solvable by talk. Dominic texted once, Bro, you're making this worse. You need to stop before Dad loses it. I blocked him. The court hearing came fast. Mavis sat beside me, hands twisting nervously, but determined. Jeffrey and Beatrice arrived with a lawyer who looked like he regretted being hired the second he read the case file. Dominic came too, expression empty, avoiding eye contact. Their attorney tried everything, claiming cultural misunderstanding, misinterpreted intentions, parental rights, stress, financial hardship, discipline, temporary poor judgment. The DA shut it down one piece at a time. When the judge asked Mavis to speak, she didn't cry. She didn't shake. She said in a steady voice, I was scared to go home. I don't feel safe with them. That was all it took. Seth Gordon is granted full guardianship, the judge ruled. Effective immediately. Jeffrey looked like the verdict personally insulted him. Beatrice burst into tears. Dominic stared at the floor like a coward who'd finally run out of excuses. About a week later, Mavis and I heard the foreclosure on the farm had finally gone through. The bank had taken the land, the equipment, the house, everything. Years of pretending the farm was untouchable had eventually caught up with them. That evening, someone knocked on my door. I checked the peephole. Jeffrey and Beatrice standing in the hallway. I didn't open the door. The protective order made that easy. Please, Beatrice said through the door. We have nothing left. Jeffrey added, Seth, you owe us this. I almost laughed. I don't owe you anything. You're destroying us, Jeffrey snarled. No, I said. You did that yourself. They stood there a minute longer, then left when I didn't respond again. That was the last time I saw either of them. Life with Mavis settled into something quieter, something healthier. She started therapy. She made friends at school. She asked questions. Not out of fear, but curiosity. She talked about wanting to become a vet someday, working with animals because she wanted to, not because someone demanded it. One night, she looked up from her homework and asked, "Do you think we'll be okay?" "Yeah," I said. "We will." She smiled. Small, genuine, the kind I'd never seen from her at home. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the past. I was building something better. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.